morning and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Leveraging the Value of Laserfiche Capture. I'm Kimberly and I will be your moderator today. Before I introduce our speakers, let's quickly run through the GoToMeeting user interface. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. I'll monitor the questions during the presentation, and I may stop and interrupt Greg midstream or hold them till the end. Also, the presentation always looks best in full screen mode, so you'll want to enable that by clicking on the full screen option. Finally, yes, we will be recording the webinar and we will post it to our website. I'll have it up for Monday, so you can share it with a colleague or review it again or use it for training. Our presenters today are me and Greg Heim, Senior Vice President of Complete Paperless Solutions. Many of you already have worked and or know Greg and know he has decades of experience in envisioning, implementing, and training on Laserfiche solutions with an emphasis on ease of use and innovation, and finally, automation of business processes. Our second presenter is Jamie Dunn, Vice President of Sales for CPS. Jamie's expertise in Laserfiche was honed in the field while working with prospects and clients for over a decade. The CPS team partners with clients, helping them develop solutions to balance service excellence with efficient operations. Next slide, please. This webinar content is really a result of several conversations between Greg and I about the evolution of the concept of capture. Over the last 5 years, capture has undergone a complete transformation. So rather than thinking, oh, it's capture, it's getting rid of paper, capture now encompasses an entire systems approach. If we examine capture at the enterprise level, it typically has a core set of features that provide not only product-based functionality, but also platform APIs to integrate, extend, and allow usage at the application level. Encouragingly, there can be exponential benefits to the modernization of document automation and capture technologies. As the first step, rather than assign the vague term of digitization, and yes, I'm guilty of using it too, to these efforts, why not view and use capture as a systems on-ramp, and as such, the first step to automation. Greg is going to show you all the aspects of capture, from scanning to quick fields, from Laserfiche workflow to highly specialized processes, and from database lookups to Laserfiche mobile. So Greg, when you're ready, please go on ahead.
All right, thank you, Kimberly. And welcome everybody. Today we're going to start at a 101 level and talk about basic scanning, standard scanning. We're going to move up through quick fields, and we'll get into some more technical features and functionality that are built into the core of the Laserfiche application, as well as we're going to take a look at Laserfiche Mobile and also a product called the Laserfiche Capture module. And with that, I'm just going to jump right in, and we're going to talk about a few things. Now, over the years, we've come across a few situations with basic users and a lot of recurring questions. So I thought that I might cover those first as we go through the basic scanning. Now, what you see on the screen right now is a Laserfiche Thick client. The Laserfiche Thin client web access has the same scanning interface that we're going to take a look at. And, there's a simple scan option that allows you to scan through either the web-based or through the Thick client, as you see here. Now, one of the recurring questions that we had was, I went into my scanning and it doesn't look the same as it did when I went there last week, because sometimes profiles change, you got a new machine, and everything in scanning, just like everything in Laserfiche, is held in your Windows profile. So the way you had the window set up and configured is retrieved every time you open Laserfiche, and it's back to the way you set it. But sometimes, it gets reset and people wonder why their scanning interface doesn't look the same. Now, we're going to talk right now about that real quick. We have two different scanning modes that you can get to through the Laserfiche clients. One is basic mode and the other one is standard mode. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to click on the basic mode with the Don't Ask Me Again option so you can see what happens, and we'll show you how to fix this issue if you come across it or if you're currently going through it with your own scanning. Now, basic mode and standard mode don't have a lot of feature functionality as far as being retained in some type of profile that you have, for some of the tokens and some of the auto settings that you have, like quick fields will, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. It has basic enhancements only, and it has basic token use. And when we talk about tokens, we're talking about, automatically populating the date into a field or automatically populating the user that's actually doing the scanning, so on and so forth. So what you see on the screen right now is the basic Laserfiche scanning window, okay? And this big empty gray spot here is actually where the image would post itself. Before we get to that though, one of the other key issues, or one of the things that generates a call, is that a lot of times when somebody comes into the application, they see this thing that says choose scan sources, okay? And we have multiple options for choosing scan source. And a lot of people are like, hey, my scanner isn't working or it doesn't look the same. It's because it might have gotten reset. And if you see this come up, or if it comes up blank, you'll notice that up here it has a search directory, and then it also has the file type. Well, that is a part of the feature functionality and configuration for this thing called Universal Capture. Universal Capture actually pulls from the local drive, or it pulls information from a network drive instead of from a scanner, okay? And so with that setup, it allows you to put what directory you want it to pull or what you want it to look at, and then the file of type that you might want to pull in, whether it be a TIFF file or a JPEG or what have you. Laserfiche supports, I think, just JPEG, PDF, and GIF. We'll take a look at that later. The other options on the list are Twain, right, which is a generic interface. It is not what we call a commercial interface, but it is what usually comes with every scanner that you have. It comes with a very simplistic Twain interface. Now, granted, there are some higher end scanners like Fujitsu and Canon that have really put a lot more effort into developing the Twain drivers for their hardware. Now, these are drivers that allow the scanning device as a piece of hardware to communicate with the computer via some type of application such as Laserfiche scanning, okay? It's just a set of instructions that tells the computer, how to connect and configure the device that you have attached to it, all right? The next one that we see down on the list is called Scan Connect. Now, this is more of a commercial driver type situation. If you guys have heard of ISIS drivers, these are on the commercial side. And what happens with these is a lot of the times they run silently with their interfaces or their user interfaces, to whereas Twain, pops up their own dialogue. An ISIS driver has a lot more built into it, and these interfaces usually post their configuration options through the user interface that is built into the application, such as Laserfiche right here. And then the last thing is the WIA engine, which is also kind of like the Twain interface, but what they try to do there is they try to hide some of those dialogues that we're talking about. Now, I don't have a scanner hooked up because I'm actually running my headset, and you guys might run into the same problem that I do, is that I only have X amount of USB ports to be able to use, and my headset for my audio and is being used right now. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to pick an application directory, and it'll allow me to pull any type of JPEG image out of there that I need to pull. And then, like I said, we can configure this for a network drive. One of the applications for that would be walking up to a copier machine and setting your copier machine to scan to a network drive, okay? And then I'm not going to delete the original images, but what I'm going to do is just put this in there so I can come off of the screen. Okay. So now when I hit the scan, it's going to actually pull those files through the Laserfiche scanning interface, but it's going to pull them from users' Gheim pictures. I'm not actually going to pull them through, but I've got a lot to cover today, so you guys can use your imagination that I scan something through. The other thing that I want to point out is on the right-hand side, we just have a simplistic, interface here that shows your template fields, tags, which is, not going to go too much into that, but it's a separate level of information that can be assigned to documents, whether it be an informational tag or whether it be a security tag. Sometimes human resources assigns a security tag at scan time. So if an image that is scanned accidentally gets put in the wrong directory, people still can't see it, especially if it's sensitive information. And then the last tab we have is, the volume, which is where it's going to be stored on the back end and so on and so forth. Lastly, down at the bottom, we have OCR settings, which allow us to OCR the documents as they're pulled through, right? And one note that I'd like to point out here is that we are in basic scanning, so OCRing the documents so that they're searchable. You might do it here, especially if you're just using a desktop scanner and you're not concerned about speed. However, if you have a high-end scanner, something that's, 60, 70, 80 pages per minute, or, 160 pages in full duplex, meaning scanning the front side and the back side, you might not want to OCR at scan time because it's going to take that 160 pages per minute and drop it down to 20 pages per minute because it has to OCR each page, okay? And this comes up in a dialog window, as you can see here, which is a little bit different than standard mode. Also, we have enhancements down here, and it comes up in its own user interface, our dialog window, or GUI. And what this has is the ability to deskew images, meaning if it comes in crooked, straighten it out. Despeckle an image. I don't know if you guys have ever ran something through the copier machine. It's got all those little dots on it. Those little pixels can be removed by noise level by saying, hey, if there's a cluster of 2 or a cluster of 3, go ahead and remove it. But you got to be careful, because if you go too high on this number, then you'll remove periods and commas and the dots on the I's and punctuation. So you got to be careful with that. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about this as we go through standard mode. Now, this is what is called basic mode, and what happens a lot when somebody goes back into scan, they might have been in standard mode, and you notice the first time that we went in, we actually had the option to scan in basic mode, and we had the option to scan in standard mode. Well, I just went in, and it's popped up on the other screen here. Hang on, let me move it over. It didn't pop up that time with the option to choose which scanning window I wanted. So if that ever happens to you, I'm going to close this window. If we go to Tools, Options, and you'll notice here that we have this thing called Reset, right?
Hey, it looks like we don't have any audio from Greg. So let's just see if we can get that fixed real quick.
Greg, we don't have your audio.
Getting a message here saying that I can't be heard. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay. All right. I'm not sure how much you missed.
I
When you
would
were
say
clicking
about a minute
scan,
and a half. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm not sure what's up with that. It might be, again, with those USB ports accessing, the scanners trying to scan the interface is trying to scan my USB ports and to find a scanner, which is not actually connected right now. So we'll hopefully not have that problem moving forward too much once we get out of the scanner interfaces. Okay. Now, on the right-hand side here, I was just pointing out that, we still have the fields, the tags, and the settings, but we have a couple more options under settings, right? We have the folder path, which we can browse to of where we're going to store the documents. And if we have, a set number of pages per document, and say, for example, I'm scanning in 10 pages and each one of those is its own document, then we can actually limit per one page so that those 10 pages become 10 documents versus 10 pages becoming one document. Anyway, and then of course the volume that we want to store it in. Okay. Now, I'm going to stay over here on the template. We talked a little bit about those tokens that come with the basic and standard. And one of them is up where it says the default document name. And these tokens are date, time, username, computer name, ID, so on and so forth. So say, for example, if I choose the date and I put the word scanned in front of it, the documents will automatically be named with the word scanned and then today's date. I could also put in the date and time so that we have some type of uniqueness when they're stored in Laserfiche, so we don't get that parenthesis 2 or parenthesis 3 or whatever around the documents as they're stored. Okay, I've got another. All right, had another chat message there. I wanted to make sure you guys could still hear me. All right, and so now if you take a look over on the left-hand side, you'll notice that the despeckle, deskew, and all those options that we had are displayed on this pane in configuration. And if I click on image processes, you'll notice that over on the right-hand side, I have a few more things that I can add to my scanning configuration. In the basic mode, we had deskew and we had despeckle. But now in the standard mode, you notice that I can do border padding, border removal, like if there's a black border on the side and we want to have those removed because of the page size is smaller than the configured page size, or if something comes in skewed, you'll notice that it puts a black border on it or what have you. Or it might even be a document that was scanned that way originally. We have the ability to do quite a few things here. We're not going to go into all of them, but I'm just going to talk to a few. Cropping the document to a specific size, you might do. A lot of people do this when they zone OCR because they want to make sure that the zone falls into a proper place. You see this happen a lot when people scan invoices and things like that. Inverting the document. Sometimes if you ever seen when you scan something where it comes in as a black page with white lettering, that's because an invert is on or something is going on with your scanner driver and it's not compatible 100% because you might have been using one of those cheaper Twain drivers that I talked about, where it comes in white on black instead of black on white. So you might put the invert on there to change it around. And that happens when the header information for the documents is not correct, and that comes from the driver that's being used. Line removal, well, that's exactly what it means, is if there's lines that go across, or if you have a grid or a chart or something that's on there and you want to remove the lines and just have the text, that's what line removal does. Resizing the document, that's self-explanatory. Rotating the document is pretty self-explanatory, but I'll go into this real quick. You can try to automatically rotate all pages. So say, for example, if they come in the wrong orientation, you can have it try to automatically recognize that and spin the document into the right orientation. Or you might know that, a specific page, because these are specific documents, are in a landscape mode, and you might want to rotate them because you're scanning in portrait mode, but you know that there's one landscape document in there. So you might just say on a specific page to go ahead and rotate that one. Okay. All right. Let me go back over here. And then, of course, this smooth option, this actually takes and can take erosion off of the edges of documents and smooth them out, or do a process what we call anti-alias. So you can grow and shrink documents so that the text looks a little bit better than it would, because sometimes these documents are a little disheveled. So what you can go do is through here and say, go ahead and grow the outer edges of the text by 1 pixel or 2 pixels, right? And then after it's grown and it has the shape of the word or the letter, then you can erode, like say, by 1 pixel so that it smooths out the edges of the text. And you guys know that sometimes, especially like if you're on Greenbar or, some of those old dot matrix documents, that they're pretty dithered and they're hard to read because they're not joined like they should probably be joined. And then when you go try to OCR them and index them, the OCR doesn't work very well because it doesn't get a very good read. So smooth can come in handy quite a bit, especially if you're doing a lot of omni-page OCR. And of course, I'll just say it real quick, omni-page OCR is optical character recognition. Every time we scan a document or bring something into Laserfiche, we OCR and index it to make it fully text searchable. And again, by doing some of these image cleanup and some of these processes to the documents, we'll find that we get a better OCR read on them and we get more accurate results back when we do searches for documents within the Laserfiche application. And then lastly, we have page removal. And page removal is good for when you're scanning in what we call full duplex, or scanning front and back with your scanner. Because you might have documents where there is something on the back side of the page, but for the most of them, they're blank. So what page removal does is it goes through and says, all right, let's try to automatically recognize, if there's something on the back side, and if not, then we'll remove it. So basically, if there's any black or any text or anything on the back of a page, that actually has a bit size to it, or bytes in this particular case, to where, a black line might have, 3,000 bytes that make up the data that's actually stored for the backside of that image. Well, if it's just a line or, something, then we're going to assume that that's a blank page and we want to remove it. And we can take this up to, 10,000 bytes, which is probably where I wouldn't go too far over. But what it'll do is it'll look at the back, and if there's just a little bit of black on it, it'll still remove it as a blank page. So it's trial and error. But most of the time, if you set this thing for, like, say, 10,000 bytes, it will go through and delete every page that was blank on the backside, but it'll still keep any page or any document page that has information on it, and it'll present it as its own page, its own singular page or thumbnail as things are scanned, okay? Now, with all of these on the left-hand side, and this again is in standard mode, I have the ability to right-click on them and remove, delete, reconfigure, do whatever. And again, it's trial and error. You don't want to get too crazy with some of the settings, but and then again, keep in mind too that the more we add for image processing, the slower our scanning is going to be. It does slow it down when it has to process. Okay. And then lastly, over here we have, let me see if I can scan something in here. Yes. All right, so you'll notice over here on the bottom, we have this revision pane. And this revision pane in standard scanning, it actually shows me the document pages that I brought in. You'll notice that the first option up here is where I'm going to store it at, department/finance. Well, I configured that over here when I browsed to it and said, where do I want to store the documents? So it scanned 3 pages in, and it shows me those 3 pages. And you'll notice down here at the bottom, it shows me an output log for the scanning. You notice that I had that smooth option that I just added, and it said image to smooth must be black and white. Well, these aren't black and white images. These are probably grayscale or something along those lines, and they're bitmaps, okay? It scanned 3 pages and processed 3 pages, and it had 0 errors that occurred. All right. I am going to go ahead and combine these documents here and make them one document. As you know, before we set it to start a new document at a single page. So let me go ahead and combine these so I can show you the thumbnails down here. All right, so now that we have those combined, you'll notice that this bottom pane down here actually shows the thumbnails. We can delete, we can reorganize, make page 2, page 1, make page 3, page 2, so on and so forth. And so this is in the standard view, and this is part of that functionality that you do not have in the basic scanning application. All right, let's see what else we want to cover here.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Welcome back, Greg.
Hi,
Hey.
Greg. Welcome.
Yeah. All right. So I guess the issue with that is I'm using one of those headsets that have the microphone and everything on it, and as I'm going through and enabling these scanner interfaces, it must be doing something with browsing my USB ports and disconnecting my audio somehow. So I do apologize for that. I went ahead and called in using my telephone. Hopefully we didn't lose too many of you. All right. So I was actually talking about quick fields here now. Kimberly told me that we lost you when we were looking at the grayscale images, and we were talking about some of the image processing. And we'll kind of recap that through this, because one of the things that I was pointing out is you notice that this interface with the quick fields scanning application is very similar to the standard scanning, outside of the fact that we have a few more options here. The first main thing is that we can store these configurations that we set up, and we can have multiple configurations that we store depending on what we're scanning. We might have a quick field session that does something for inventory or tracking, another one for invoicing, another one for purchase orders, and another one for whatever the case might be. And each one of those can be stored and saved either locally or on the server, where everybody can have access to the quick field sessions that were saved on the server. Okay. Now, the other thing that we have here in the top left in the configuration window that you didn't have in standard, you'll notice that we have a lot more options here for DSKU. We have all the regular processing that we did for image enhancement. But you'll notice that we have under processes here a lot more options, such as optical mark recognition, barcode, Bates numbering, and not only do we have the OCRing, but we have this thing called zone OCRing, where we're not going to OCR the whole page, but we might just want to pick up something that's on the page itself. Okay, so a lot more features, a lot more functionality. We're going to take a closer look at just a couple of them. We don't have time to go through all of them, especially since we had this little mishap. Now, going through this is in a pre-classification mode, so we might, before we actually add those to a recognized document, we might deskew, despeckle, do all those other kinds of things to help clean up the documents before they get to what we call first page identification. Okay? Now, each one of these sessions have classifications. Now, depending on which version you have of Quick Fields, you have a single classification, or you can have multiple classifications. So meaning that, I'm walked up to the copier machine and I'm using Quick Fields to actually pull from a network directory. But when I walked up to the copier machine, I had, 10 different document types and, 20 different documents. And each one of those documents that get pulled through would go through a classification and say, oh, this is for invoices, but that's not an invoice. So then it would go to the next classification until it finally finds a match. And you're going to see that as we go through some of the other capture pieces, and that principle for documents or information on the documents meeting a certain criteria, and if it doesn't, then it moves into the next bucket, so to speak, to find a match. And if it doesn't, then it gets unidentified. But it really helps with our quality assurance as we configure these things and pull things through. Now, with this, we're only going to look at one classification, and in this classification, we're actually using a thing called first page identification, and we're using a thing called slip sheet technology to identify the different documents that get pulled through. So when somebody walks up to the copier machine, they have this slip sheet that we print, and the slip sheet is something that gets put in between each document type. So every time it hits this slip sheet, it starts a new document. And this is great, especially if you're using your copier machines and pulling these from, the network, that every time it hits that page, not only does it start a new document, but we also tell it to remove this, okay? And so what we do for this identification is we're using a process called Zone OCR, right? So we want to identify these slip sheets. So what I did to make it easy is I put a little unique identifier in the bottom right corner, and it's always in the bottom right corner in this nice little zone. And what I told it was to use Zone OCR, and you'll notice on the right-hand side here that I have this thing called Zone 1. That's what this box is going around everything. You can see it kind of in the middle. That says Zone 1. And when I click on this, I have an identification condition. When I click on that, you notice it says if Zone 1 contains SC1375 CPS, okay? It's just something I came up with that was unique that you'd never find in a document page in the bottom right corner. Every time it sees that in the zone, it recognizes that as the beginning of a new document, or it recognizes that as my slip sheet, okay? Now, once it recognizes that, it actually puts the document down here in the bottom left. Every time it hits one of these slip sheets, it recognizes that unique identifier that was there, and it automatically breaks out the stack of documents that I was running through. You'll notice here as it goes through, I've got multiple pages. It hits a slip sheet, 3 pages, 4 pages, hits another slip sheet, starts a new document, okay? So that is the purpose of the slip sheet. That is the first page identification that I am doing, okay? Now, the next thing that I'm doing, we'll wait for this to finish up, is that I am capturing information off the page. So in the top right corner of these documents, you'll notice that I have the department, right? And if I go through these documents, let me get rid of that. I just had to make sure it wasn't Kimberly calling me again saying you can't hear me. You'll notice in the top right corner, it has the name of the department, right? Finance, so on and so forth, okay? And so what we're doing with this page processing here is we're capturing that top right corner of information, right? And in this particular zone, we just want to grab the word that's there so that when we come over here to our template, we can use that as a token of information that it captured. And we can actually grab that token that we created called capture department name, see it there, and then the token name department, and automatically populate that first field, right, in our template. So that when it gets stored into Laserfiche, I have a workflow that reads these documents, looks at that first field, and then automatically puts it in the appropriate department quality assurance folder. So when one of those documents come through and the slip sheet was administration, it automatically knows it to throw it into the quality assurance folder for administration, and then it also puts it in this folder called from copy machine, okay? So that is using Zone OCR to identify documents as they are processed through QuickFields. Now, Zone OCR is not 100% accurate. A lot of people have barcodes that they use, and you'll notice instead of using, the Zone OCR technology, I might add in for first page identification the barcode feature. Okay, and with this, we will just tell it that hey, every time you hit a barcode, go ahead and start a new document. I, over the years, have kind of strayed away from that because we found that there are a lot of documents that people get these days, like, say, for example, a stub from utility billing. We have a customer that has one of those that they scan all the time, and they have 3 barcodes on them. And so if you're not careful, you might start new documents off of a document that had a barcode that wasn't your first page identification barcode. And if you want to use barcodes, as we did with the Zone OCR, we should put an identification in there. So you'd have a specific barcode that you generated that says this is a new document, right? And if we went through first page identification and you came across a barcode, you would want it to have the condition that says barcode must equal, you know, the name of the barcode itself, which would be, you know, new document or whatever the case might be. So that way, if you have pages that have other barcodes on them, you don't accidentally start a new document because it recognized the barcode from a different document, okay? There is a lot more to quick fields than just what I'm showing you today. We're kind of doing this 30,000 foot view of all these different technologies, just, I guess, to heighten your awareness. But I think that what we might do in the very near future is a webinar just on quick fields itself and go further and take a deeper dive into the feature functionality of quick fields. We are not going to do that today, however, and I do apologize because we got a few other cool things that we want to show you. Now we're going to get into some really neat stuff, okay? The next thing that we're going to talk about here is using the core of Laserfiche and Laserfiche workflow to process and capture information from scanned images. Now let's see, the first one I'm going to show you is accounts payable. We'll do incoming invoices. All right, so these are invoices that I scanned from my copier machine. I pulled them and had them brought in using another module that Laserfiche has called Import Agent. Now, Import Agent is a polling application that looks at a network drive, and anytime a document gets dropped in there, it just automatically brings them into Laserfiche, and it brings them into whatever folder you told them to bring them into. There is another polling application that marries itself with the Laserfiche Quick Fields application, which we just looked at, which is a polling agent that allows you to use Quick Fields and all of the configurations to actually process documents silently in the background and bring them into Laserfiche automatically, okay? If you're interested in either one of those, you might just check with your reseller and talk about polling applications, okay? Import Agent or the Quick Fields agent are both polling applications. Bring in documents in the background silently. Now, in this particular case, we have a set of batches that were scanned, and they're all invoices, okay? And you notice that there's nothing really fancy going on here. There's no template assigned. These are just basic invoices for accounts payable that have come in from multiple vendors, okay? And this is one of the big challenges, and this is a very important topic to cover, is because, you know, there's a lot of product and there's a lot of, you know, third-party applications that say, oh, well, we help you with, you know, invoice processing, and here's what we do, and here's what we do, and, you know, it's not 100% accurate. Well, we found a way to use Laserfiche to actually increase our accuracy, even though we're scanning invoices from, you know, different vendors where the invoice number is in a different place, the total is in a different place, the date is in a different place. So what we're doing with these particular documents is we're using technology that comes with the Laserfiche core application in workflow called pattern matching, okay? And what pattern matching does, and we're going to look at this on the back end too. I'm not just going to show this one to you on the front end, but I'll show you the back end as well. These patterns that we do use a thing called regular expressions, which allow us to go out and look for patterns of information. And as you'll notice in these documents, you know, one of the patterns we might look for is the word invoice, right? And if you come across invoice number, then give me whatever the value is that follows it. Now, not all of them say invoice or invoice number. Some say INV. Some, you know, have it in a different place. We talked about that line removal during scanning. A lot of the times, if we get rid of the lines or the boxes around these things virtually through scanning, then it gets a better read on the invoice number because we took it outside of the box, these lines that are around it. So that's one of those things. You notice that we've got invoice no on this one instead of invoice number. So in each one of these instances, we have to look for a different pattern of information, in this case, invoice number, to find what the invoice number, the actual physical number is that follows it, okay? Now, with that
Greg,
said,
can I interrupt you with a question?
Yeah,
really
go ahead.
quick?
Go ahead.
So when you were showing the field by the invoice with the little check mark by it, oftentimes when organizations do receiving, that's part of their process, right? Like they're ticking off that the invoice matches the purchase order and then that they get the things that they said that they shipped.
Right.
You're not having to get rid of the checkbox though, right? But if you circled it, you would have to get rid of that, right?
Well, if you want to do it the right way, Kimberly, with this full workflow that I have, it actually takes and compares the invoice number with the purchase order number that was already generated from the CRP. Yeah, so we don't do it with a little checkbox. We actually use Laserfiche workflow to compare the two and then marry them together in one folder. So you notice, and we've done this in the past with our invoice processing webinar, what we do is we look at the invoice number, we look into a database that we created sometimes, or we look into the finance system, and we marry the invoice with the purchase order, right? And put it all in the same folder, right? And then even after the fact, what we do is we marry the check stub or the check with the invoice and the purchase order. And we do all of that using Laserfiche workflow. And if you're more interested in looking at that, there is already out in the CPS support site a webinar for invoice processing accounts payable, and you'll see all of this, okay? And different instances of it, okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and process this. And so I've got this little button up here that says Invoice Capture. And what I'm doing is just triggering workflow to take a look at this incoming invoices folder, okay? And you'll notice that it's slowly but surely trying to recognize the invoice number, the amount, and the date. Those are the three things that I'm configured to try to recognize. Now, I've got this set so the ones that it didn't recognize come to the top, and you notice it didn't do very good on these top two. Let's go ahead and open those and see why. So with the first one, it got the date, and you notice that I'm also using workflow to highlight these to make them easier to see. So the date is green, and the total is in red, and then the invoice number would be in yellow, but there is no invoice number on this one. It did not recognize it. So we would actually have to manually put that one in. Not sure why. It might be from that little tick mark that you just mentioned, Kim, that caused it to not recognize. Now, in this one here, you'll notice that we also didn't get an invoice number, but I don't see one on the page. And then the other thing that we didn't do very good was get the amount total, because I don't see, normally on an invoice you see subtotal and total at the bottom, so we told it in our pattern matching to look for that. Well, since this doesn't have that on there, it didn't pick them up. So these are the only two, but let's go through the rest of them and see how we did. So amount, we didn't get that, because it was redacted on this one, so it went to the next best thing, which was the tax. And we did the date just fine. And the invoice number 1013, purchase order number, invoice, so the invoice number was redacted there as well. Let's move on here. We need some better results. All right, so in this one, we did good on the invoice number or order number. In this case, invoice date, we got it. And then our total, because we did a pattern match that looks for variations of the word total, and it did good on the total at the bottom. Let's go to the next one, and then we'll move on. Amount, order number, date, everything, that was 100% accurate on that one. But now keep in mind too that we're running this in through a quality assurance folder, and that with the full workflow process, what it does is it goes through these and it has tolerance set to it that says, hey, we're not 100% sure, if we found it correctly. And you'll notice on those earlier documents, let me move up, you notice that this one has a tag on it, right? And this tag that was assigned to it is that the confidence level is low, that we were 100% accurate on it, right? So that's also set up in the workflow on the back end. But you notice we did a pretty good job of grabbing the amount, the date, and the invoice number. Now, again, Zone OCR technology is not 100% accurate, and in this particular case, we're doing a good job because we're spanning over multiple different types of invoices, trying to capture the information from each individual vendor. So this is one of those things that Laserfiche, believe it or not, with the setup that we have, did a pretty good job. Now, with that said, let me show you what's going on the back end here. So here's our invoice capture, and I'm not going to bore you too much with it, but just so you can wrap your head around, right? What this does when I push the button is it finds the invoices in the same entry as the folders that same folder that the entry that I had selected. And for each one of those invoices, it processes it where it gets the text from the invoice, right? Because we OCR'd them, right, with accuracy. So that's important too. So there's two options when you OCR. One is for accuracy and one is for speed, and then the other one is to balance the two. Whenever I do invoices, I always set it for accuracy, which is slower, but I'd much rather have a better read. And again, going back to our image enhancement with the despeckle and deskew and, you know, the grow shrink type of stuff, we want to get the best read on these as possible so that it limits our keystrokes later on. Okay, very important, you guys. So we grab the text from those, and then we also have a little block in here that says, hey, make sure that these documents have text. And if it doesn't, it actually ends this workflow for it and posts it, renames it, and says, hey, OCR and index this thing before you try to run this process again. So we put a little trap in there for that. Okay? Now, I talked about those patterns that uses regular expressions, and what I did is I created a whole slew of different patterns, and you'll notice that we've got different variations of invoice period with certain, you know, words that follow it, invoice number, and things like that. Not just for the invoices, but you'll notice that we have these ones down here for amount, looking for, you know, like a digit, comma, digit, period, decimal point, you know, digit, things like that, right? And so with these regular expressions, we actually, and this is a little bit more advanced, but there is, and this is for some of you IT representatives out there that have a little bit of programming, and I'm sure you probably have better regular expression knowledge than I do. You can actually set up regular expressions or patterns to trap these things. Okay, so I've got that patterns set up here. Now the next thing I have is filters that filter these invoices down, right? So you notice that, and here's a very important thing to note, is that these buckets is what we'll call them, these different branches that go down from this invoice information that we're looking for, right? Filter invoice numbers. It reads from left to right, right? So we put the most obvious pattern match on the left-hand side, and the not so obvious, and the not so obvious, and the not so obvious, so that by the time it gets to the end, if it didn't match this one, and it didn't match this one, and it didn't match this one, and this one, we then add these annotations that say, hey, you know what, our tolerance level or our confidence level is a little bit lower because it went through all these other pattern matches and didn't recognize it until finally it got all the way to the end and said, look, I didn't find an invoice at all. So it puts a tag on it that says, hey, you're going to have to manually do this one. And these other two branches here, we put a confidency low tag on these to bring your eye to them and say, hey, these ones definitely could have, misreads on them. But the ones that are on the far left side as they move fine, they're pretty accurate. It says, okay, here's a solid match, especially if it drops down the first bucket. So that's kind of how we do it. Is we read from left to right, and we go through this process of, hit and miss, right? And that actually, believe it or not, it improves our quality assurance. It improves the quality and accuracy of the information that we're trying to gather. Now, the other thing that we're doing on here is the amount, right? We have a separate filter process with separate pattern matching to try to pick up the amount from the invoice. And then lastly, we have the date. And the date is actually pretty easy because there's not too many variables for date. It's usually, month, day, year, and it's usually whether it has a dash or whether it has a slash, okay? So date is a lot easier to recognize. So this is done through Laserfiche workflow. Now, don't get me wrong. You can do pattern matching and all that in the Quick Fields application as well. But what you can't do in the Quick Fields application is set up this bucket list, so to speak, where it actually can go through multiple different patterns and then have multiple options built right into it. So I like using Quick Fields to do it, but I like using Laserfiche workflow even more because I have just more options in the workflow application, okay? So that is our workflow for processing invoices that are brought in from a polling application, or they might be scanned from a desktop scanner or maybe from a production scanner. It doesn't matter. 9 times out of 10, we usually use technology that you already have, such as these high-speed, high-quality copier machines. Okay. Now, we're going to move on. The next thing that I want to show you is capturing information from a PDF. Because this is really important, because we have a lot of documents that get submitted, and a lot of them are in paper format. But a lot of people nowadays are posting PDFs, fillable PDFs, on their websites, or documents that come in that were filled out electronically, either from a form submission or a PDF submission, or maybe even something in a kiosk over the counter. Now, I have this folder here called Public Records Requests. Okay. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to grab a document that I have over here. Hang on just a minute. My machine is moving a little bit slow. There we go. All right, and I have this document. Let me just open it. It's called PRA Requests. All right, let me show it to you. So inside of here, I've got the date, and what is today? Today is 02-22-2022, and I'm going to put my full name in here, Gregory S. Heim. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and save that, and I'll go ahead and close this. Now, watch what happens, and we're going to look at this in the back end as well, the workflow for it. I'm going to drag and drop this PRA request form into my folder. Okay. Now you notice that there's no template assigned. I'm just going to say okay, because I'm not going to assign the template. And I'm going to drag this public records form. And this could be a form that was filled out from your website that somebody made the request. I have one customer that has Laserfiche web link, for their public portal. But on the web link, they have a link there that says, click here if you'd like to submit a PRA request, because you couldn't find it through web link. And so they fill out this form. And so with this one, you'll notice that as I drag and drop it in, it actually, since it didn't have a template before, you'll notice that the electronic file is not coming in quick enough. But you'll notice on the right-hand side, they grabbed all the information from the form itself and automatically populated the fields over here. Now you notice that there's fields also on here that aren't in the form, such as the department, the division, and the record series, because these are public records requests, and we're pulling that default information because we know it's a PRA. Okay, but you'll notice that the document date was captured. You'll notice that the name was captured, and you'll notice that the address and all those other kind of things were there. You'll notice too, I didn't fill out the records requested, but it would also grab that and put it over in the template, for the, what records is it that you're looking for. Okay, so we're automatically capturing those form fields from a PDF that was just drag and drop into Laserfiche. Now, pretty cool stuff. Let me show you how it works. Okay, we'll go back over to Laserfiche workflow, right? And you'll notice that we have, I'll just use this one. On the left-hand side, we have all these different tools that we can use in our workflows. And one of them that I grabbed here was Retrieve PDF Form Content. If I double-click on that, you notice that I've registered this form, a blank version of it, on my workflow server. You can see that on the right-hand side. And it goes through and it reads that PDF, right? And it gives me the available fields from that PDF to use in my workflow. And I just simply have to add them, the ones that I want to use, and then say OK to it. And now those fields become available. Now, just to speed things up, I've already configured it over here. Here's the same object, and I've added all the fields from it, as you can see. The next thing I did was I'm taking and I'm assigning those fields to the Laserfiche template. So I'm retrieving, as you can see here, retrieve the PDF content, right, and place it at address. You'll notice here that I have more than one token, so I'm doing the basic address field, and I'm also putting in the city, right, from that field as well, and putting it all into one line into one template field called address, right? You notice I have some default things here because I know it's a PRA request, so I already know the government code. I know that it belongs to administration, and I know that the division is municipal clerk and so on. But the document date is one of those PDF tokens that gets pulled and put into the field automatically. The email, the name, and you see all these other things, that get posted inside of the Laserfiche template that are grabbed automatically or captured automatically from the PDF itself. And then, just a simple workflow. I'm renaming it as a PRA request and then storing it in a specific area or emailing it to a specific person so that they can process this PRA. Very simple workflow using email, using, technology that is, something that you probably already have. A PDF editor is basically all that's needed, so that you can create your own fillable form in Adobe and post it onto your website, okay? Now, that is capturing from.
All right, so here we're going to take a look at a product called the Laserfiche Connector. So what I have on the screen here is just my contacts list, but we're going to pretend that this is a third-party primary application or legacy application. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up one of my contacts, right? And you notice that this button up here appeared. This Laserfiche button. So I'm going to go in and edit this because basically what I'm going to do is I have a document that I want to add to Laserfiche, right, from my third party or primary application. So what I can do here is bring up the record in question, and when I click on the Laserfiche button, you'll notice it gives me this contacts thing here. And it's going to open a little dialog screen because I told it to, and what it's doing is it's grabbing the first name, last name, company, and so on, information from the screen, so that when I go to either scan a document in or to bring in a document, it automatically creates the linkage between my third-party application and the Laserfiche repository where these documents are stored. So now you notice that it's imported the file, okay? We go into Laserfiche, take a quick look at that. I told it to go right off of the root of my repository into a folder called contacts. And here it is. So you notice here is Charmine, and here is the 9 barcode types document that I brought in. And here, of course, is the information that was captured. Okay, automatically grabbed it, filled out the template, stored the document in Laserfiche. Now in turn, let's go ahead and retrieve that document. We'll go ahead and create. So here we have the same screen that's up, and we're going to create another quick session here. I'm going to grab the Laserfiche Connector dialog box and open it. Let me bring this up on this screen. Let me show you how easy this is. So with this one, instead of creating the linkage to store a document, we're going to create the search object from this same screen. So if we're in our primary application and we want to retrieve documents related to it, we could pull up this search. So I'm just going to call this search. A key is a little sticky there. Search contacts. Okay, and we have an action here which says let's search for contacts, and we're going to open it up in the Laserfiche web client. Okay, hit next, and it wants me to choose the source application. My source application, of course, is my contact, so let me add this. So it has this little target box. I'm going to drag this over to my source application. Actually, let me do one thing here real quick. I'm going to have to minimize this because it is not targeting this application properly. So let me just move that off to the side real quick. And so I'm going to add, we'll call this search. And we're going to search for documents in the web client. Next, I'm going to add the application. Let me move that off to the side. drag and drop this over here. You notice over here it realized the source application, and I'm saying this page only, or I could do the whole website because it's web-based. I'm going to actually change this from JavaScript to UI because not everybody has Java, but this user interface automation control seems to work pretty well. I'm going to go ahead and save that. Okay. Now once it gets done analyzing the application, it's going to ask me for my search criteria on how I'm going to retrieve the information from this particular record. Now, anytime we're doing lookups, it's always a good idea to grab something that is a unique identifier. And if we don't have a unique identifier, then we would grab multiple objects to create something unique, like first name, last name, and company, or something along those lines. But in this particular case, we have one in the email address. So again, I've got this little token here. I'm just going to drag it over to the email address, and you notice it automatically puts this red box around it when it recognizes it. So we're going to grab that email field, and we're going to use that as our search token for Laserfiche. So it's going to search for the email in any document that was stored, or the linkage was created, as you saw in that first part of this demo, to Laserfiche. And we're going to call this token name search. Okay. I'm going to hit next. And this is asking for my Laserfiche web client URL, and in this case my machine name is gsh/Laserfiche, and my repository is GRMS, Greg's Records Management System, and we'll hit next. Alright, so now I have the ability to do either a quick search, which you guys are probably familiar with in the regular client, or to do an advanced search with search syntax. We're going to keep on the quick search here, and we're not going to search all of these items. We're only going to search for fields, because as you know, in the last presentation of this, when we created the linkage, we stored everything in a Laserfiche template. So that's all we're going to search on. So we're going to look for the email address in any field in the Laserfiche repository. Okay, we're going to look for documents, and what is our search criteria? Well, we're going to put that token in there that we created called search. Okay, so whatever value is in that search token, it'll pass it through to Laserfiche and retrieve any documents related. Okay, all right, we can put a quick key on this if we want, Control Alt and a number or a key, whatever. I'm not going to do that for now. I'm not going to do any button properties, although we could change the button, I guess, change the size of it like I did, and then, put it wherever we want. We can change the location of it, do what have you with the application. Anyway, let's go ahead and move that over, and now we'll just test it to see that it works. So I've got the Shamin, and I hit the test button, and what it should do is it should just go out to the Laserfiche repository. It should find any documents that have that email address from the linkage that we created and present it to us right in this web-based window. And 9 barcode types, looks like it found it, and there it is. Okay, and we used the unique identifier email. So with this particular application, we had 2 different configurations that we did. Let me finish this up and we'll show them to you. So we have Chrome contacts, because Chrome was the browser that I was using, and this was the one that created the linkage between the document that we stored and the record that we had up in our primary, our legacy application. And then the search, looks like I got an extra H in there, that actually retrieved the document from the Laserfiche application based on the unique identifier, which was the email address, and it returned the document to us through this application. So that is called the Laserfiche Connector, and it is a great tool. If you don't have it, by default it's not part of the Laserfiche suite, so if you're interested in this application, get with your Laserfiche reseller and get a price on it, and you can tie it in with your finance system or ESRI, your GIS, higher All right. Now, last but not least, we're going to take you into Laserfiche Mobile, and we're going to show you how to use the mobile application for, in this example, reading a water meter at a certain residence. So what I'm going to do here is I've got a QR code reader built into my phone. And you notice my desktop, it's got a little meter here, the QR code, and it created a link there. I'm going to click on that link. And this is going to load up Laserfiche Mobile and take me straight to the record for this particular address. Right now we're looking at the document, which is a picture of the meter, but I can click on this little button down here, which will take me to the fields. Now you'll notice I have my information for this particular address, 5130 East La Palma, Complete Paperless Solutions. I've got my January meter read in there. I'm going to go ahead and put in 02-2022, and I don't remember 35. Well, we'll just put a number in there, and call it good. So I'm going to put in the meter read for February. Now, as simple as that, and each one of these meters has a different UPC code or on it, and we just read it. It takes us straight to the record for that address. Easy peasy. You'll also notice that next to each one of these fields, hang on a minute, let me move this thing over here so you can see it. There is a little hang on a minute, let me move that to the left. Okay, so you'll notice that there's a little button there that has a barcode next to each field. I can actually click on this button and it brings up that barcode reader that's built into my camera again. And I've got this barcode thing that we have left over from our Laserfiche Connector, and I'm going to select a field here, and I'm going to capture one of these barcodes, 01234565, right? Pretty cool. So that's Laserfiche Mobile. I mean, very easy on the go. Gives you access to all your Laserfiche documents in your repository. It comes with Laserfiche forms as well, and allows us to be in the field and access our information. Let me try to get back to our documents here. Hang on just a minute. I'm not sure why it's not refreshing. Here we go. No, not recent. Let's go back to all files, and here we go. And we'll go back to, where is it? City records. Oh, down there at the bottom. And let's see. Public Works, water, stored by address here. And there it is. Here's our template fields. There's the barcode information that we read, and so on. So this is a really kind of a unique, easy way to use Laserfiche Mobile.
With that said, I guess we have to move on here. We're already running really late. I guess if Murphy didn't follow me around, I wouldn't know what to do. So let me get a thing up here. And
Okay, so Jamie had some backfile conversion news that he wanted to share with the group.
Yeah, just real quick. So I'll make this nice, short, and sweet. We've had a lot of clients here asking about backfile conversion and want to make sure that everybody is familiar and aware that CPS does offer backfile conversion services from anything from maybe an existing or older database that you might have, where we can convert that all over to Laserfiche. And then we also have a scanning bureau that can take care of any type of film, fiche, drawings, maps, plans, any type of documents that you have. We can scan it in. Just people have a good amount of questions about this process because there's never enough time in the day for you to scan in all of your paper documents and banker's boxes that you might have. So we just kind of throw it out there to give you an idea. Each banker's box, you're probably looking around $400 to $500 for ingesting that. We scan it in, provide 2 index fields as well as the name of the document. If you do have an interest of getting a quote for something like that, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to help. I can explain the process a little bit more in depth, but it's something we do very often for our clients. We also have a few piggybackable contracts for citywide contracts if you wanted to jump on those. So feel free to give me a shout, or anybody on the CPS team. We can chat with you more about some of the conversion services that we offer. So with that being said, go ahead and pass it back to Kim.
Okay, it doesn't look like we have any questions, but I want to pause just for a moment to give anyone the opportunity to ask questions, which it doesn't look like we're getting questions. Okay. Well, thank you, Greg, and thank you, Jamie, and thank you to our audience. We appreciate you being here and being patient with our hiccups. And again, we'll clean up the recording of this and make sure everything is shipshape. And you'll get a notification from CPS that the link to the webinar recording is available. And I'm shooting for Monday on that. And we'll post it on our website as well. So if for some reason you missed it, check cps247.com. There's also a wealth of resources there. There's tech tips, there's training, there's various industry articles, there's case studies, couple hundred of pieces of information that we hope will find useful. So thanks again for making the time to join us today, and we will see you at the next webinar.